All right, thanks everybody for showing up tonight. Just to get us started off here, my name's John Goff. I'm a senior forecaster at the Weather Service over in Burlington. And just to give you a little history about myself, first of all, it's very nice to be here at the Brownell Library tonight to speak with you folks. It's been a while since, ironically, I've spoken in Essex Junction, even though we're very local here. Weather's been a passion my whole life. Many meteorologists will tell you that. Ever since I've been a kid, growing up, I've loved weather. I lived in Southwest Ohio when I was a grade schooler through junior high and high school, and so my hometown was about 5 miles from Xenia, Ohio. Some of you may remember the Xenia, Ohio tornado back in 1974, a big outbreak of tornadoes that unfortunately killed a lot of people. But that was kind of my first interest in weather, and so it's been a passion all my life. I'm originally from the Carolinas, though before Ohio, and I got my start in the Weather Service down in North Carolina and Raleigh, and did some stint down there, and also did some work in South Texas on the Gulf Coast in Corpus Christi, and was there for a few years. But then we had an opportunity to come up here, and my wife had actually applied to UVM coming out of high school. She's from Indiana, where we met at school, and she ended up going a different route, but when the job came open here, she had very fond memories of New England. So we've been here for 11 years, and we love it. Our kids are in school here, so no plans to leave in the near future, so hopefully that'll pan out okay. So let's go ahead and get started here. Here's just a brief overview of the program. I'll talk a little bit about who we are and where we are and what we do, and talk more in depth about our severe weather philosophy, how we go about forecasting severe weather and how we broadcast that to you. Then we'll talk more about the Skywarn program, which is part of why I'm here tonight. If you're interested in being a spotter for us, a voluntary storm spotter, I'll talk about the program and what it entails and why it's valuable. And then as we get a little bit more into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, I'll go more into thunderstorms. I'll talk about the types of severe thunderstorms, the visual aspects of severe thunderstorms, and then the types of severe weather they produce. And in this whole part of the program, I'll have a number of movies and animated GIFs that'll get you out of the bulleted, boring slide presentation side of it. And then as we wrap up toward the end, I'll talk more about severe weather reporting procedures, what we'd like to hear from our spotters when they call in. And then wrap up some common sense stuff with safety, what to do in severe weather. And so the whole program lasts about an hour and 40 minutes, somewhere along that time frame. But it's very informal, so if you have any questions while I'm talking, just raise your hand and I'll stop and try to answer, because I'm sure you may have some things you want to ask as I go through some of this stuff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about our staff, our severe weather products, and how to access our products in severe weather in our area. Our area of responsibility is most of Vermont and northern New York. So as you can see by the map here, for the most part, it's all of Vermont except for the southern 2 counties of Bennington and Windham, and also the 4 northern New York counties of Essex, Clinton, St. Lawrence, and Franklin. So in New York, it's basically the St. Lawrence Valley and the northern Adirondacks. And in Vermont, all of Vermont except for Bennington and Windham. Outside of that area are other Weather Service offices' areas of responsibility. So for example, to our south mainly is Albany. To our east is Portland, Maine, and then to our west on the little far left side of your map is Weather Service in Buffalo. And so there's about 122 offices nationwide. They're pretty much equidistant, generally set up based off of where the radar network existed prior to when we came into being as the way we are, military installations, things of that nature. Not always, but in general they're fairly equidistant. We provide all the weather and water forecasts and warnings for our area of responsibility. So that's the 7-day forecast, and that's any sort of severe weather warnings or winter warnings, things of that nature. That all comes from us. And again, I already mentioned the similar offices around the country. Weather never stops, right? It's 24 hours, 7 days a week, so there's always bodies on the chairs where we work, 24 hours and 7, 2 to 3 people at all times. More during the typical business weekday hours of 9 to 5. We have the management folks that are on board that'll be with us that can help support us. But on the weekends and certainly on the overnight shifts, there's usually only two bodies on. Our staff consists of about 9 forecasters. 4 techs are interns, 4 electronic technicians, IT type folks, which are really the backbone of our office. We have so many computer systems, it's critical. Whether that's just computer systems in our office or automated weather sensors around the state, 2-state region to fix, they're out there. And then 5, I mentioned the administrative support folks. We have a management staff. So let's talk about our severe weather philosophy and how it kind of really pans out. We kind of think about it as a ready, set, go philosophy. Outlook, watch, and warning. And the main thing I want you to get away as I go away from this, as I come through the next 3 slides, is basically from an outlook, you're going from a large area, a watch, a smaller regional area, to a warning, which is a very small county or even sub-county size area. The outlook, as you can see on that top left slide here on the top, that's generally issued beyond the first day, 12 to 24 hours, and sometimes even out to a week in advance. I'll show you in a minute. We have a product called Hazardous Weather Outlook. It's a text product. We put it out every day at about 4 or 5 in the morning. That's when we normally put it out. It can be updated at any time. And that's where you'll get that outlook information that's not really an imminent threat, but something may happen. So 99 days out of 100, it's just going to say no hazardous weather is expected. But on a day like today, or maybe yesterday, the product would say severe thunderstorms are possible later today, or severe thunderstorms are possible next Tuesday, or something like of that nature. Then as we get down to the watch phase, it's more of a coordinated effort between our offices. So Albany and Buffalo and us, for example, will get on a conference call. We have a National Storm Prediction Center that's out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. It's actually in Norman, Oklahoma. They do all the national severe weather coordination around the nation. So we'll get on a conference call with them and all of our regional offices and agree where we're going to put a watch out. That's going to be a narrower in time frame and generally of the day it happens. So severe weather is not imminent, but it's getting more likely. So that's defined by the orange box in your map on the right there. And usually 2 to 6, 3 to 8 hours in advance. So like the day we had a tornado watch out, it came out somewhere around noon and it was valid through 8 o'clock. And we can adjust that once it goes out as the severe weather evolves or changes or moves out of the area. But that's a kind of a national and regionally coordinated area. The box I've drawn like that is very simplistic. It can also be kind of a polygon and not exactly rectangular. And then finally, when you get down to the very bottom there, the warnings, that's actually us at the local level. So that's defined by the little red dot there in the middle of the orange box. So that's a small county or a small multi-county area. And that's going to be me at the local office on the radar putting out the warning. So again, you go from the broad outlook, 2 to 7 days in advance, the regionally coordinated watch among offices in our national center, and then the warning down to the very local level, which is just me. So that's just kind of the timeline. And when the warnings go out, of course, that's when severe weather is imminent. That's when we've spotted it on radar or somebody's called in and reported storm damage. So this is an example of a severe thunderstorm warning. That's the small little dot. We draw them in polygons, so you can see kind of the yellow box there. We draw it to where we think the severe weather is going to go. It can be in one county, it can be a couple counties. It doesn't have to end at a county line. So when you're viewing these things, you'll know whether you're in the threat or not. Now there are limitations to this. The existing EAS broadcast system is still tied to the county line. So if a little bit of that box goes into Addison County, everybody with a NOAA weather radio that has a tone alert for Addison County will alarm. But if you want to get more specific and you have web access, you can see exactly where it is, or you have a mobile access on your phone, you can get that stuff with applications. There's the text of the product on the left. When I put the warning out, the computer, I draw the box on the radar with the computer software. The warning is generated automatically by the computer and I hit send. I don't type all of this stuff in initially because this would take 5-10 minutes to be typing away, spell checking, all that kind of thing. So I draw the box, I create the warning product, and then I hit send. For the most part, I can get that out in about 45 seconds to about a minute. I'm not worried about typing or anything like that. The spell check should already be taken care of for me, and then I hit send. Generally, in the life cycle of a warning, let's say it's an hour, a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm warning, we can give updated severe weather statements in the lifetime of that warning. So let's say a severe thunderstorm warning comes out for Chittenden County from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. this evening. Usually about halfway through the life cycle of a warning, I'll try to update to give better information about it. And this is where I have time as an operator to actually get in there and type a little bit. Because the warning is now out for an hour, I have time to watch the storm, and I can put some valuable information in here. So for example, this paragraph here, I'll generate this and I can type in on the second paragraph, trained weather spotters reported a severe thunderstorm producing quarter-size hail, things of that nature. So I can add some more explicit information in there. And that's me, and I can kind of go in there and enter things like that. We usually try to update those as much as we can. If it's really active, sometimes there may only be one update in the life cycle of a warning. If it's kind of a slow evening when we have a couple warnings out, for example, I may be able to update this several times. It just depends on workload. Okay, So that was a little bit about the warning philosophy. Let's talk a little bit about severe weather. This is a 50-year climatology of severe weather through 2006. Not all severe weather that's on this map and reported actually, not everything that happened is reported on this map. Obviously there's things that happen in the woods that nobody sees. This is what was reported, and it's a little bit hard to read and see, but there's a whole host of little green balls, blue X's, and then little red streaks. The red streaks are tornado tracks. The blue crosses are wind reports, and the green balls are large hail reports. The long X track of this apparent tornado in eastern Vermont, that's actually an error. There was a tornado there, but in the database there was an error when they entered it, and we've been trying to get rid of it for years. It's still in there. They have to coordinate that. It's a long story, don't get me started on that. But anyway, the main thing I want you to take away from this map is that by far and large, the majority of severe weather that happens in the North Country in Vermont is wind and hail damage. Very few tornadoes. We don't get the big tornadoes that they get like in Joplin, Missouri and Tuscaloosa. We've never gotten those since they've been reported. They just don't happen that often. Tornadoes generally 1 a year, sometimes 2 a year, sometimes 0, but we haven't had a year, I think, over 2 a year. Most of it's going to be wind and hail, which is a good thing. You don't have to deal with the real big violent tornadoes. In terms of a time of year and time of day climatology, these are very self-explanatory, and I won't go too much in depth here, but this is basically wind reports, tornado reports, and hail reports, and basically by month, and it makes sense. Most of them are in the warm season, June, July, and August. There also are a few small number of reports even in the winter, so it can theoretically can happen even in January if you get the right things to come together. Mother Nature doesn't really care. There's been the oddball 65-degree day in January, and it can happen, but majority of it is in the summer. So where can you get weather information? There's several sources. Obviously, your media outlets, TV and radio. You've got your NOAA weather radio, like you mentioned, sir, earlier, that you listen to every day. You've got mobile applications on your PDA devices, whether cell phone or BlackBerry or whatever, that you can get applications that'll give you the weather. And then you can also go to our internet site, which is weather.gov, G-O-V, not weather.com, /Burlington, okay? Another way you can get to it, and I don't have it really on here, but if you go to weather.gov and just in there, it gives you a national map, and then you can click on Vermont. It gives you like a map of the lower 48, and you can click on Vermont. The nice thing about that map, and I don't have an example here, but you can click anywhere in the country, and it'll give you the local weather service offices page. So if you have a vacation to Las Vegas, for example, you can just click on Las Vegas, and it'll take you to the Las Vegas weather service page. So it's kind of nice. I mentioned NOAA Weather Radio All Hazards. We have 5 transmitters that we broadcast on. Again, this is all automated by computer. From the St. Lawrence Valley out to central and south central Vermont. Most people here in Essex Junction will get their information on weather radio off of Mount Mansfield, KIG 60, which is 162.4 megahertz on your NOAA Weather Radio transmitters. All of these frequencies, I should say, are preset into your NOAA Weather radios, so you don't have to really necessarily go searching for them. Usually they're preset on there, and one of these is going to work wherever you are.
I got a question. How old is the transmitter on Whitesville and St. Lawrence County? Is that fairly new?
That's fairly new, about a year and a half.
Okay, but I lived out there for 4 years, moved back like 3 years ago. We couldn't get anything.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's been a work in progress for probably 10 years, but the problem with a transmitter like that that's close to the Canadian border, you have to run through a lot of regulations through the Canadian government, do test broadcasts, make sure it's not interfering. They have their own kind of equivalent of an FCC, and so you've got to go through there, and the paperwork sits on a bureaucrat's desk forever, and so, but it's been in the works in about a year and a half. So those folks out at Messina and Ogdensburg and Canton are really appreciative they can get it. But even with this network of 5 transmitters, there's still areas it's line of sight, so there's still areas that are down in a hollow somewhere that may not be able to get a signal. That's just the nature of the beast. So this is just a little navigation of our website, weather.gov/Burlington or /BTV. That will work too. As you can see here, there's a number of options. Submit a storm report. There's some severe weather information, radar information. If you click on the map wherever you live, you can get the 7-day forecast. And what you can actually do, you can click on where Essex Junction is and even bookmark that site, and it'll give you a little Google map, and you don't even have to go through this. So, I mean, the technology's there. You can do as much or as little with it as you want. But there's a lot of information on there. The blue menu on the right, there's a whole wealth of information. I'd encourage you to go in there and navigate, and you can always ask me questions. If you have trouble figuring out where everything is, I'll give you our number at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about the Skywarn program. This is the eyes of the National Weather Service, our people on the ground that help us out. So what is it? Well, it's a national network of volunteer weather spotters, and they report many forms of significant or severe weather. So this is severe thunderstorms, tornado. They can report ice accumulation, snow, flash flooding, river flooding, any of that kind of significant weather. They're trained by us, like I'm talking to you tonight. It's got its roots in amateur radio back in the 50s and 60s. It originally got started out in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas for detection of the big tornadoes that occurred out there. But it's grown nationwide, and it's pretty much been a staple of the National Weather Service for the past 25 years. It's been pretty much everywhere. But again, about 50, 60 years ago is when it originally got started. So why are Skywarn folks and reports helpful? Ground truth, that's the main thing. We have all the radar and satellite data and weather sensors, but severe weather doesn't always happen right on a weather sensor, and nor can the radar tell us exactly what's happening. It can tell us a good sense of what's happening, and I'll show you some examples in a little while, but we really never exactly know until we get reports of severe weather. And so that's the big thing, getting the reports from the ground truth. It aids in the warning process because sometimes it's the only thing we have to issue a warning on. Sometimes we may think a storm is not severe and we hold off on issuing a warning, but we'll get a report in that a spotter said, hey, this is severe, so we'll go ahead and off of that issue a warning. It lends credibility to warnings. If you recall earlier, I showed you those severe weather statements where I issue them halfway through the life cycle of the warning. If you put those spotter reports in there, people then start to believe it because people start saying, well, people reported it. And so it lends credibility. It helps us calibrate radar in real time. In this sense, mainly I'm talking about rainfall rates. In addition to precipitation and wind and things of that nature, the radar can also measure how much rain has fallen. So when a spotter will call in with rainfall reports, we can adjust the radar because the radar will always run a little bit hot or a little bit cold. It's never perfect. And so we can adjust it and calibrate it in that way. And it can also be used in research efforts. In this case, I'm talking about after a severe weather event, we archive all of our severe cases on DVDs, and we can play them back on a later date in real time. So if we have a newbie guy come in that's needing some training on the radar, we can play the case back, like today's severe weather. I can play this back in January for him, and then I can infuse the spotter reports into the thing so it's actually like he's working a real event. So you can use in training efforts. And then it also can be used to estimate damage. We have something called a local storm report that we put out every day during severe weather, and it'll list all the severe storm reports, and that's the official record. So if somebody had their roof blown off or roof damaged and the insurance company is questioning that, they can go back and refer to this as at least one document to help them out. And so this is an example of that. And it's pretty straightforward. It's chronologically listed from earliest to latest, and it also has the location, the latitude, longitude, who reported it. So the second one down, for example, it was in Putnamville in Washington County, law enforcement, time, what happened. And so we're constantly updating that. And the media takes a lot of this too and will report it as well. I mentioned that National Coordination Center we do on the watches, those regional watches, when we get on with Oklahoma City and coordinate it. It's called the Storm Prediction Center, or SPC. It's a really neat page, spc.noaa.gov. If you like weather, I'd encourage you to go there and look. They also have a climatological daily report every day. So they'll put out a national map every day of the severe weather reported. And I don't have it shown on this map, but the web page will have this map on it and then a whole long lineage of text listings, which is basically all of those local storm reports from across the country, all the way down by time. So it won't be as neat as what we'll put out because it's all just our stuff chronologically in our area. What this will be listed out as is every report by time. So it may say Vermont, Colorado, Texas, Nebraska, Florida, Vermont, all by time. But the map is nice because you can see what happened. And again, the icons are a little bit different, but the reds are tornado, blue is wind, and the green is hail on this day, which is 5 years ago or so. So again, let's go back to the reason we need spotters. I talked about the radar, how it's a fantastic tool, but it's not perfect. A couple things about the radar. Basically what it does is it takes a beam out and sends a pulse of energy out, and it reflects off a target and comes back. That's how all radar works. It's picking up energy signals, and the energy return signal, it's processing that and turning that into a signal. So it goes out and back, and it's rotating around. So it rotates all the way around, sending out pulses, and then it moves up a slice and goes all the way around, and then moves up a slice and moves all the way around. In reality, it goes around and backwards a couple times. The whole process takes about 5 minutes, and it's basically what it's doing is it's tracing out a cone in the atmosphere, okay? So you're kind of looking at a large cone of the atmosphere. But a couple caveats with that, as you see on the graphic here, one of the limitations, FCC rules, you can't aim the radar into the ground. You'd like to be able to see exactly on the ground, but you can't really do that. That's basically low dose radiation aiming right down toward the ground. Now, it's not like a nuclear power plant radiation, it's very low dose, so long-term exposure is probably not going to hurt you, but again, it's radiation, it's against the rules. So basically what we do is our lowest slice we can look at is a half of 1 degree off the horizon, a half of 1 degree, so just off the horizon. And then depending on how active the weather is, I can govern as a radar operator how many slices I want to take. If it's fair weather in September, blue skies and 70 degrees, I don't want the radar to work that hard, so I'll only maybe take 4 slices of the atmosphere, and that's it. An active day like this, you can go up to 17 slices of the atmosphere, and it runs a lot harder. And we try to limit that only to the severe weather days. These are 30-year-old radars that are constantly moving, and they have to get new parts, and so you want to baby them. But the main idea I want you to get here is, since I'm aiming off the horizon, as you can see on the graphic here, you have 2 things. One, you're already getting higher and higher as I get further from the radar, and as I go out 50, 60, 70, 80 miles, the curvature of the Earth starts going away. Okay, so if you look at Storm A on the right and Storm B on the left, you can see I have better sampling on Storm A because I'm looking at the storm lower down, which is what I want. I want to see the best data, the closest to the ground, to give an idea of what may be happening on the ground. Storm B, I'm looking higher up, so I can make some assumptions, but they're not quite as strong of assumptions because I'm higher up. So this is an example. The white dot, it's a 4-panel. The white dot where the little wedge is coming in is our radar over in Colchester, and you're looking up into northeastern Vermont. And there's a little dot over in Essex County, Vermont, kind of near Island Pond. You may be able to make that out. And these are the slices in the atmosphere as I go up. So I have a half of a degree, and at a half of 1 degree in the upper left panel here, you can see over in the Island Pond area, I'm already 4,000 feet off the ground. That's as low as I can see at Island Pond. Okay? So my next slice, I go up to 1.3 degrees off the horizon. I'm at 8,600 feet, okay? And so on and so forth. So by the time I'm 2.4 degrees, I'm 15,000 feet. Now, one other thing I'd like to point out in this map is radar's line of sight. So it can't see through buildings and mountains. So as you can see, there's like the first top 2 especially, there's kind of like a black wedge in there. It looks like nothing's happening. Well, that's Mount Mansfield that's blocking that. Okay, I can't look through the mountains. Big problem with any radar anywhere in the country or the world. If you're in mountains, you're limited by where your mountains are. So for example, in the lowest 2 slices, all the way up to 8,600 feet, I can see nothing over an Island Pond. So I'm already limited to looking over 10,000 feet up in the storm to make some assumptions on whether that storm is severe. So that goes back to why the ground truth reports on the spotters are so essential, because I don't necessarily know. Now, I can make some good assumptions on big, tall storms that are 50, 60,000 feet high. I can make some pretty good assumptions that those are going to be severe. However, the ground truth really confirms, and that's the value of that. So let's just take a review of the first section here. I talked a little bit about us, who we are, what we do. We're staffed 24/7. I showed you where we cover. Remember, all of Vermont except for the southern 2 counties and the 4 counties of northern New York. And we provide all the weather and water forecasts and warnings for our area. We talked about the severe weather philosophy, right? The outlook, the watch, and the warning. And then how to get our products on the radio and the internet, media, things of that nature, the web. And then we also talked just now about the Skywarn spotter reports and the value of that. I should mention here briefly, at the end of the presentation, this is all free informational literature, so I'd encourage you to look at any of this and take anything you want. And if you are interested in the Skywarn network, it's a free voluntary program. Basically what it is you're just a spotter for us. If you observe severe weather, you call us in and say, this is what I saw in Essex Junction or wherever you live, in Colchester or whatever. The sign-up sheets are right here. You give them to me. We keep it in a database locally in-house. It doesn't go anywhere else but our office. And the beauty of it is we can overlay your location over the radar. So when storms go overhead, I know exactly where my spotters are and who could be calling in, and if I don't get information from a storm, that I could possibly call them to see if they have any information on it. We never call anybody after about 8 o'clock, but in regular hours, if we don't get any information on a storm, for example, way up in the Adirondacks, if I've got a couple spotters out there, I'll give them a call if I haven't heard anything. And so that's all that is, and you fill this out for me, I take it back to the office and I'll send you a certificate and a Skywarn sticker and things of that nature. So you get a little official little thing. Totally free though. You can take it or leave it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about thunderstorms. We're going to talk about the 4 types of severe thunderstorms, their classifications. This is going to be a little more fun. I'm going to show you some movies and some slides. That was kind of the quote-unquote more mundane part of the program. We'll talk about the visual aspects of severe thunderstorms, what to look for, and then we'll talk about the severe weather they produce, hail, tornadoes, strong winds. So these are the 4 types of thunderstorms we're going to talk about, and I'll talk more about these in depth. We have the single cell thunderstorm, the multicell thunderstorm, which is more or less a cluster of thunderstorms, a line of storms, which I believe is what came through today, which is a line. It's being called a squall line or a derecho when it's very severe. And we also have something called a supercell thunderstorm, which is basically a rotating thunderstorm, which is the most dangerous. So let's talk about the single cell thunderstorm. These are the most common thunderstorms on any given day in the summer anywhere in the country. It's got 3 main phases to it, and this is kind of can be applicable to many thunderstorms. There's a development stage, a mature phase, and a dissipating stage. In a single cell thunderstorm in its most simple form, which you'd read in a textbook, the whole life cycle is about 45 minutes to an hour or so, sometimes even less. You have an updraft, and I'll show you some pictures here in a moment where the cloud is growing. The warm air is rising and cooling and condensing into a cloud. Then you have the mature phase where the storm has an updraft and a downdraft, and this is when the severe weather is going to be most important to observe, and this is where it's likely going to occur. And then a dissipating stage when the storm becomes all downdraft and it weakens. So this is an example of the above and below of the life cycle. So on the left 2, and there's a corresponding picture under each slide. So on the left panel here, you can see the cloud is totally updraft dominated. The warm air is rising and cooling and condensing. And so you have a nice billowing cumulus cloud, which is shown below in the picture here. By the time you get to the mature phase, what happens is rain starts falling out of the cloud. And so that starts to cool the air as rain's falling. Evaporation is cooling. If you ever get out of the shower and you're cold, evaporation off your body, it's a cooling process. So the air is cooled, and so you have a cool downdraft coming out, but you still have an updraft coming up. So you have both. This is when the severe weather is going to happen if it's going to occur on a strong single cell thunderstorm, because what happens is the cool air rushes down out of the cloud to the ground. All thunderstorms have that. Any thunderstorm, you're going to get to feel the cool air. It's just that in the strongest severe ones, it's just a strong downdraft, particularly strong. What happens too, the air is cooled by the rain, and there's 2 processes going on. Cool air is heavier than warm air. It sinks. You ever been in the kitchen and you're cooking bacon in the morning, the warm air's up at the ceiling, right? Cool air down low, or in a fire, right? You're taught to go on the ground. So the cool air is sinking. Also, the raindrops, all those little billions and billions of raindrops as they're falling, they're dragging little tiny parcels of air down with them. So that collective effect accelerates the air downward. And that's the process of what we call a downdraft. And I'll show you a little bit about that in just a second. And then on the 3rd slide here, the cloud is totally downdraft dominated. It's all raining out. It's all downdraft. The cloud can't grow anymore because you don't have a warm updraft forming the cloud. And so the warm updraft on the far right here is cut off, and the cloud slowly rains itself out and dissipates. Very simplistic view, but that's basically what goes on. So what to look for, the brief, strong to possibly damaging downdraft winds, usually less than 5 minutes. Sometimes you can get larger hail embedded within a downdraft, and sometimes you can get an overshooting top. And let me talk to you about an overshooting top here. What happens is when you get the updraft going really strong up through the storm, there's a stable layer on the top of the storm, which is called the stratosphere. It's a very stable layer, way up high, 30, 40, 50,000 feet, depending on the day. If the updraft is really strong, it can punch right through that stable layer. Most of the storm will hit that stable layer at the top and spread out. Most thunderstorms you'll see have that kind of flat anvil type form on the top of them. If you have a really strong updraft, it'll poke right through that, and it's indicative of usually a strong to severe thunderstorm. So I'll show you a movie here, and it'll take a second to play. The screen will go black probably for about 5 seconds. But what these are is it's a real-time view of it, and then it'll go in fast motion. So you can see the flattening out at the top of the storm where the stratosphere is, but over the top of that, you can see the updraft is pushed right through that. And on really strong thunderstorms, which I'll talk about in a little while, the real severe ones, the updrafts are about 150 to 175 miles an hour, straight up. So very severe, and that's, you understand why like airplanes try to stay away from that, because really it's just like a wall of wind. If you run into that, you can have some problems. But as it goes into fast motion here, you can really see the convective effect of the updraft rising up through and in this case, punching all the way up through the stable layer. Again, these are idealistic movies. A lot of these are from the Great Plains where you can see 50 miles, but on one of the severe thunderstorms earlier today that went across just north of us, I was coming back from Ticonderoga from chaperoning one of my kids' field trips down there, and you could see an overshooting top off to the north. And I knew right away that's probably strong to severe maybe, and sure enough it was. Once I got back home I checked on it and it was. So it's a good way to check. If you see a distant storm that has like a little bubble on top of that flat area, that's a good indication of a strong thunderstorm, or maybe severe. This is what the single cell thunderstorms look like on radar. They're very just popcorny, kind of unorganized kind of stuff. You see a lot during the summer. They're in different stages of development. So some of them are dissipating, some of them are growing, some of them are in the mature phase, and they're just kind of disorganized and kind of come and go. They're necessarily not the strongest type of severe thunderstorms, but they're inherently hard to warn for because they're kind of coming and going really fast. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. You got to be really, really alert on the radar. And there's another picture of one, a single cell, one big updraft and the flattening on top. We can also look at it in cross sections on our radar. This is a cross section of a single cell storm. So basically you're kind of looking into the page of the storm. And I just wanted to show you from a conceptual standpoint, you can see how the dark reds and purples, it's basically just one updraft coming up through. I know it's a little hard to see on the screen there, but basically one big updraft in the storm. So let's talk about downbursts. This is a good place to talk about that. They can happen in any severe thunderstorm, and I'm going to talk about them here because it's the most common type of severe weather in single cell thunderstorms. Again, an area of rapidly descending air beneath the thunderstorm. Straight line winds are the wind damage that result. There's no tornadoes in a downburst. It's just a big rush of cold air. Now, we get reports of tornadoes every year because of downbursts, which is not a problem. We understand that because what happens is when the downburst hits the ground, it doesn't have anywhere to go. It's got to spread out. So stuff starts swirling around. When you have 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds coming straight down to the ground, stuff's going to swirl around. And some people can mistake that for a tornado. And in fact, in this picture on the left side of the screen, you can almost see how it's curling up on the end because it has to go somewhere. And a lot of times it'll curl up. We call that feature a rain foot. But again, straight line winds, most of the winds will come down and it'll blow out in one direction and all the damage is falling, for example, trees in one direction. So this is an idealized little movie of a downburst, how it comes down, hits the ground, and then curls up on itself. Sometimes you can see these out in the desert southwest and the high deserts in the west where you can see forever and it's very clear and a lot of the thunderstorms don't have a lot of rain with them. You can see the downburst kind of come down with the rain really quickly. Most downbursts that occur in Vermont and the eastern half of the United States are usually embedded in the rain itself, so you really can't physically see them. And it's certainly if you're experiencing them and in them, you can't see them. You just see suddenly the wind's blowing really strong. This is a downburst caught on radar. I mentioned we can see precipitation. We can also see wind. The radar can detect how the rain droplets are moving, so they can tell you whether the raindrops are coming toward the radar or away from the radar. Okay, so the cell, this storm back in 2005 mainly was responsible for a lot of basement flooding over Williston. You may remember where they got 5 inches of rain and the Williston golf course closed for a while. But it did have a downburst with it. It had some tree damage with it. On the right picture here, the black hole there in the upper left, that's our radar. And there's kind of a black hole of about 1 mile around the radar. You can't see like right overhead. It can't look straight up. But as you look off to the south and east here, you see where those arrows are pulsing. The green signatures are winds toward the radar, and the reds are the winds away from the radar. So you can imply right in the middle of those arrows, there's a downburst coming straight down, and the winds are spreading out. Okay? This is a really good case where you're capturing something right by the radar. Back to the spotter value, if this happened in Island Pond, there's no way I'm going to see this because I'm looking at 10,000 feet up. I may see something up there, but I don't know if that's really what's happening in the ground. On this case, you could see it immediately because it's only 5 miles, not even that, 4 miles from the radar. Here's some downburst damage out in Newcomb, New York. If you're familiar where this map is in Newcomb, this is kind of the western part of Essex County. So kind of south and west of Saranac Lake. If you go down to Crown Point in that area and head west, it's out that way toward Old Forge, out that way. And so here's a downburst. So the downburst came in this instance, it came from the right to the left and blew all the trees down to the left. And you can see they're all just kind of facing in one direction there. They kind of fan out a little bit, but for the most part, they're all falling. And when you do storm surveys, there's always some subjectivity to doing it. If trees are on the sides of hills or if they're leaning already, sometimes you can get some conflicting signals on how they're falling, and you could certainly mistake it for maybe a tornado. But for the most part, if you can do a pretty thorough survey, you can get a pretty good understanding whether it's straight line winds or a tornado. And this is fortuitous because this was actually a Forest Service photograph, aerial photograph that was taken a few days later. So it's always great to get an aerial survey because you can really see the picture of the damage. And this is another picture of the end of it. Not that big on this case. They can be bigger. This was maybe 20 acres, something like that, maybe. Pretty small. Okay, number 2, the multicell thunderstorm. This is the second type of severe thunderstorm, the most common thunderstorm type in general. This is basically just a cluster of thunderstorms. So you have updrafts and downdrafts in different stages of development. So you have mature cells, mature storms, dissipating storms, forming storms. Each cell lasts for about 30 minutes, but the whole cluster may last several hours because you have several things going on. Severe weather still is usually isolated and of short duration. So here's a graphic of it, as you can see by the map here. On the left-hand side, you have forming thunderstorms. The middle are your mature cells or mature storms, and then downdraft dominated on the right are your weakening storms. What to look for: brief, gusty to properly damaging winds, brief period of large hail. Large hail can happen with any thunderstorm, and I'm just kind of mentioning the severe weather as I go along, and even though I understand that those could occur with any thunderstorm, I mention them in each one. An isolated tornado, and of course an overshooting top. Here's a radar picture of one. You can see there's a little more organization than you did with a single cell. It's not quite as random. There's a kind of a cluster of them there. And then there's a picture of them, and you can see several different towers in that cluster, so there's more than one thunderstorm in there. If you're in that, it may be one big old ball of heavy rain, but they're individual cells, and so you can look in the lower left here, you can see little red kind of cores separating the individual storms out of that. So let's talk about hail. This is a good place to talk about it. Again, they can form in any storm. Basically, it's a strong sustained updraft. You have a strong updraft in a storm, and you have a small ice particle that goes up into the freezing level of the storm and gets caught in the updraft again and goes through a life cycle. On any given day in the summer, there's always a certain height where the freezing level is in the storm. On a warm summer day, anywhere between about 10 and 14,000 feet. It'll vary. At 14,000 feet would be a very hot day. 10,000 feet is going to be an average day. Today is probably 10, 11,000 feet. It wasn't particularly hot, mid-80s, so not 98 or something like that. So once those raindrops get in the updraft and go up above that freezing level, because a storm can be very high, 50,000 feet high on a big storm, those little raindrops will freeze into little ice pellets, and they'll start to melt as they fall out of the storm into the downdraft. But what happens in strong organized storms is a portion of those little ice balls will get caught back in the updraft again and go back up and again, and go back up and again, and go back up and again. And depending how long they go through that cycle, what happens is just like a snowball in winter in a sense. They melt and then they get brimed and they create a little layer of ice, and they grow and they get bigger and bigger. And eventually either they get too heavy, the updraft can't support them anymore and they fall out, or they get spit out of the updraft and just fall into the downdraft. So there's always a melting and forming process. So if you see penny-sized hail here on the ground, just know that maybe way up there in the top of the storm, it may have been the size of a golf ball or even larger, but it's melting. It's falling 3 miles or even more to the ground and melting on the way down. Now certainly you can get bigger hailstones, and so when you get baseballs falling out of a storm or you get softballs, you got to think how strong does that updraft have to be to keep softballs floating up around inside the storm. Pretty strong, right? And we can get pretty good-sized hail in Vermont. This is Duxbury back in, I believe, 2007. And so that's a large tomato. So those are maybe the size of an egg. You know, golf ball size hail is about the threshold where you start denting cars. And I'll show you the severe criteria in a little while. That's about, once you get golf ball size, you can get crop damage smaller than that, certainly. But golf ball size is the threshold where you may start seeing cracked windows and dented car hoods and things of that nature. And the damage only increases as you get bigger. Also with larger hail, it's not, you know, a spherical baseball that's all smooth. It's very clumpy, kind of broccoli, cauliflower looking kind of things. And they stick together a lot. So a lot of times it's a kind of an aggregate.
And why do you pick Westford?
Westford, because one of our employees, this fell in his yard, and we found there was no real documented largest hailstone in Vermont, so we wanted to get something started a couple years ago.
I
And so we documented it, and it's on the record book, so it's waiting to be broken.
Yeah.
Were you in that storm?
I live in Westford, and it was intense.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly did some damage. I mean, this is, when you're estimating diameter of hail, again, you got to use some subjectivity there because that's not round, and where do you measure the diameter of that thing? It's very spiky and everything, but easily 2 inches in diameter, so easily over golf ball size. And so that's the state record in Vermont. That's not saying larger hailstones didn't fall. There's been reports all the way back into the 1800s.
Was that 2 years ago?
About 2 years ago, I think July of '09.
Yeah.
I went back and looked at some newspaper articles from around just Chittenden County a couple years ago, and there was a report back in the 1800s, and I don't know the date offhand, of basically the whole town's windows all being shattered by large hail. So it had to have been at least this big. But at least there's a record now. There's a benchmark now to be, since there wasn't one before. But yeah, they can certainly get big.
How big was the hail out west of Malone last year? Like Bangor?
Yeah, that was smaller hail, but it went a lot deeper. It drifted like 3 or 4 feet deep.
And every leaf was stripped off the trees for about 3 miles.
Yeah, I would say it was golf ball size. Yeah. Some of the stones were still pretty good size a day later, so it's hard to know. We always encourage pictures, so if you see big hail and want to take a picture and email it to us, because on our webpage there's a submit storm report, and you can also email the webmaster, send a picture in. Here's golf ball size hail. I'll let this play a little bit. Let me turn my speakers on. Sorry, Martha.
Oh my God, these are huge.
He gets a little excited. This is pretty big for New England. This is in Exeter, New Hampshire, Salem, Exeter area back in '06. About $50 million in damage, mainly to the car dealerships. Really bad. And you can see when they get pretty big, they start shredding a lot of things. And I won't play this video for its whole length. It's like a 4-minute video. But I just want to give you an idea of what large hail is. And this certainly can occur in the severe storms in Vermont, golf ball size. And if you're somebody that has an apple crop or growing strawberries or something, this could be devastating if this did happen. Locally, it's on a local level. It happens not widespread usually. So those stones, those big stones, were spinning up the storm, maybe for an hour until they finally got spit out. Okay, we'll move on there.
Yeah, my mom saved some of them, put them in the freezer and show us.
Oh, really? She
Yeah,
did.
lives in Exeter.
Yeah. Well, it's scary if you never see, if it's something, you don't see something like that often. I saw baseball hail when I lived out in Denver for a number of years, and believe me, that's scary when you're in your car. I feared for my car. I got under a tree, and luckily it didn't really do much other than a couple dents. I mean, you talk about loud. Okay, so we've talked about the single cell and the multicell now, right? Let's go to the next one, which is a multicell line storm, or really a squall line, or a big line of thunderstorms. And I'm sure you folks have seen these on radar before or on the news. It's just a big line. It could be solid, there could be breaks in the line. They're best known for straight line wind damage, big straight line winds through the whole system. And they move pretty fast. They can move, a lot of times they can move 50, 60 miles an hour. So when the whole system is moving that speed, you got a lot of just wind within that anyway. The straight line winds, and I'll show you here in a minute, they're all on the front end of the storm, right when it hits, on a line of thunderstorms. Right when it hits, you get the big winds. And sometimes we see something called a bow echo when a part of the line bows out ahead of the rest of the line, and that's a really good signature for really strong damaging winds where the winds are surging out ahead of the rest of the line. So this is let me describe this figure just a little bit to you. This is a line of thunderstorms, but basically the line is going into the page. So you got to be thinking that the line, you got to be looking into the page from a three-dimensional standpoint, and the storm is moving from left to right. So as it moves from left to right, the speed is so fast it starts tilting back on itself a little bit. You can kind of imagine that, kind of like this, like this, in the way you're looking at it. And on the very right side of the screen, there's a gust front right there. And that's where all the strong winds with a big line of thunderstorms happen. It's not happening back where that downdraft wording is, where all the heavy rain is. It's right on the front end. And that's where all the new updrafts and the new thunderstorms are forming, right on the front end. As it's moving across, it's plowing in and lifting new air out ahead of it. And the gust front is pushing out ahead of it. So the gust front is pushing to your right as the storm moves to the right. So right on the front edge. First 5 to 10 minutes is where all your wind is. Here's a radar example. They can be very large systems. This is to give you a perspective. That's southern Kansas down through Oklahoma and North Texas. So that line of thunderstorms there is about 500 miles long. So very long, much bigger than you're talking a little cluster of thunderstorms or an individual single cell thunderstorms. And I mentioned those bow echoes. You can see in a few places, especially in the northern part of the line, little areas where the line, the reds are maybe bowing out a little bit. I really can't show you because I'm mic'd up here. And also down in North Texas, there's one area where the bow kind of kinks out a little bit. Those are areas where you would look for real straight line wind damage. And if you've been around here a long time, you may remember the Adirondack Derecho squall line, July 1995. Very historic squall line. To give you perspective here, BTV in the upper right is Burlington. That's our code name where our radar is. And ENX is Albany. So this is the Albany radar screen. So it's coming across the northern Adirondacks down in toward Albany. This formed a day ahead of time. These are long-lived things, 12, 18 hours long, up north of Lake Superior, rolled down through the night. The time here at the bottom is universal coordinated time, so you'll see it's 9 to 10 in the morning, 9 Zulu. So you're talking this is 4 to 5 a.m. Very dynamic systems, doesn't have to have the heat of the day on these guys to form. Luckily, they're kind of uncommon around here. We got one last year that came down through, blew the roof off the Essex Middle School up there, elementary school, and came down through the Champlain Valley. This is moving about 70 miles an hour, and the winds are about 100 to 120. Very, very severe. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of forest damage in the Adirondack. Unfortunately, there were some fatalities with campers in the Adirondacks as well, with trees falling on their campsites. This is back in the day where the warning system was still there, but it wasn't quite as mature as it is today. And even today, you know, people camping out in the wilderness, you don't know if they're still susceptible, but very severe event. And also when you get really strong squall lines like this one, if you notice on the north end, it looks like it's kind of curling up on itself, like a little curlicue, a little vortex on the north end of that. That's called a bookend vortex. And sometimes you can get weak tornadoes in those things when they curl up on themselves like that, when they're moving really fast. This is a straight line wind damage. This is a video up by International Falls in the Boundary Waters, northern Minnesota, east of International Falls. A lot of wilderness, but a lot of canoeing, camping, recreational activities up there. This is 100 mile an hour squall line winds, line of thunderstorms, big line came through. And I've only got about a 20-minute video clip, 20-second video clip of this, but this lasted for about 10 minutes. And pretty intense. And I'll play it twice because it's going to take a second to come up. And you'll see trees coming down. Softwood trees, very susceptible. Pines, spruces, very easy to snap.
How fast did you say the wind was?
About 100 on this. I'll play it one more time so now you got the screen up. You can see the. This lasted about 10 minutes. So, and it's you know, they were filming it from their picture window, which is kind of a little crazy. The picture window could have easily blown out. Again, big, right on the front end of the storm. So big derecho winds. When we see those things on radar, we don't mess around. We're putting warnings out, certainly. And you can see with radar, for the most part, coming in. But again, the spotters are very, very helpful. Okay, so again, let's just review the line storm, what to look for. It's that gust front right at the front edge leading of the line. It's a rapid change in wind direction. You go maybe from light south winds to big west damaging winds. There's a sharp increase in wind speed. You obviously get noticeably cooler temperatures because it's all rain-cooled air rushing in with the system. And then the heavy rain follows right with the gust front. So those are the main things, again, right when it hits. Shelf and roll clouds, let's talk a little bit about those. A very common feature in many severe thunderstorms. And it has to do with the strong updrafts going into the storm. The stronger the better. What it's caused by is moist inflow. It rides up and over the cooler outflow on the leading edge of the storm. And I'll show you some pictures to try to explain this to you a little bit. The clouds tend to roll over and twist, and they're often mistaken for a tornado because a lot of times they're really low to the ground. We get pictures every year of these things that people think are tornadoes, which is fine. They don't understand it. We got one just from last week on the storm up in Fletcher that caused all the flooding up there, the flash flooding. There was a shelf cloud that was basically touching the ground almost. And it looked really like a funnel, but it wasn't really rotating. So it's a very common feature. So this is a kind of a picture of how it forms. Basically what happens is you have the storm here, and you have a gust front kind of coming out. Either in this case, they're showing it's coming out either side. The rain's falling in the middle. and it comes out. And what happens is the outflow, as the outflow comes out of the storm, the inflow rides up over the outflow, kind of like this. So it's kind of wedging under, and the outflow is riding up, and that cooling process creates this kind of laminar-looking cloud that looks like a shelf. Okay, and they can look like tornadoes. This is Colchester 3 years ago, and so it's very smooth. It looks like it could be almost to the ground, maybe just 500 feet off the ground, but it's not rotating. It's just kind of moving with the storm.
That was the one that went through,
I can't remember this one. This one didn't produce a tornado, I believe. It was a severe thunderstorm and pushed. I lose them in my.
tornado that went through and hit Waterville and
Yeah, I don't think it was this storm though. I think that was July '08. I think this may have been a different one. Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I've definitely. In fact, I've got some pictures of that tornado here in a minute. So here's a shelf cloud example. Again, this is similar to the first overshooting top example I showed you, where it's going to be real time and then it'll speed up real fast, and it'll kind of show you kind of what it looks like in fast motion. Well, we'll take 3 seconds to come up. And so here it is. There's the storm. It's back off to your left, and the shelf cloud you can kind of see extending down from the storm, and the rain and the outflow is back to the lower left, and it's coming towards you. So it's pushing the cloud out toward you. And over toward the middle right, it looks like it's almost coming down to the ground. Okay, it's all it is moist inflow going up over the storm and creating that condensation. And again, it kind of, in fast motion, it kind of undulates, but it's not really rotating. It's just kind of being shoved out in a sense. And you can see new cloud elements form to the right as it pushes out. The updraft is surging out, and you can see how it's kind of forming on the front end of that. And it's kind of coming toward you. It runs through.
seems to me we've had more intense storms.
Well, we certainly have had more in common from a climatological perspective, the storms earlier. In the last couple of years, we've had them in April and May, which typically we wait to June before we get, we had the flash flooding and it was mainly flooding in that April stuff where it thundered for 7 hours here and we had all that rain. And then we've had a few examples of some where it's been very wet anyway. But yeah, even last year we had some severe thunderstorms in the Champlain Valley in
Has that
Maine.
increased over time?
That's hard to tell. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think you'd have to go back and look at a lot of climatology through the years. I think there's natural variability. Just with the tornadoes, the tragedy this year with all the deaths, I think unfortunately after you go through 100 years, eventually you're going to have a few that are going to hit some towns, and unfortunately it hit a few big populated areas. I mean, at some point, you go out 300 years, Lake Champlain's will probably hit 104 feet. But, you just got to kind of weigh the odds of that. Yeah. But I wouldn't hazard a guess whether it's more active. Here's a shelf cloud coming in from Florida. This is down toward Daytona Beach. The storm's going to come from your right at sunset, and the shelf cloud will be illuminated by the setting sun. So it's kind of interesting. And I'll play this here a couple times because it's going to take a second to pop up. Storm's coming in from your right. And in sunset, you can see the shelf cloud coming in right there, and then it kind of gets rain. I'll play this one more time since we kind of lost the front end of the video there. I may have to go back. There we go. Being a little temperamental. So again, the storm's coming in from the right. There's undulating cloud movements there, a lot of gravity waves and things in there, and then here comes the surge there. Fast motion. So the nice shelf cloud there at sunset. Okay, the last type of severe thunderstorm is called the Supercell Thunderstorm. We also call it a Mesocyclone. Meso just means small, is the Latin word for small, and cyclone meaning twisting. And so basically we're going back down to the small level again. You're talking about an individual thunderstorm, but that individual thunderstorm is rotating. It's the most highly organized of the 4 types. The strength of the updraft is the key, very strong, 150 miles an hour or greater, and its rotation. The rotation is the key in the supercells. What happens in the rotation when a storm starts rotating is you get the updraft and the downdraft separated from one another, And so the downdraft is always falling on one side of the storm, and the updraft is always on one side of the storm. So the downdraft can never, at least for a period of time, fall back down through the updraft and squash the storm out. They stay separate, very organized, so the thing can last for hours on end on supercells. They can track multi-states and
It's rotating clockwise or counterclockwise?
counterclockwise. Clockwise in the southern hemisphere, though. Opposite. But also important about these guys is about 80% of them produce severe weather. So if we see these on radar, we're going to put out the warning. It's not worth holding off on those. If we see the rotating storm, the warning's going to come out. It's the deadliest, the deadliest supercell tornado event on record is March 18th, 1925. 12-hour lifespan on one thunderstorm. It had a 300-mile path length. It's called a tri-state tornado, if you're interested in looking that up on the web. And it had about 600 plus fatalities just from that one tornado that was on the ground for 300 miles.
Tri-state being?
Tri-state meaning southern Illinois, southern Indiana, southeast Missouri. So across that area. No warnings, of course, back then, so people didn't really know. So this is what the classic supercell looks like in a textbook. Sometimes they look like this. Sometimes there's a lot of times Mother Nature, there's variations, but it basically looks like a kidney bean with a little hook on the end of it. And basically with it rotating, it almost has a little miniature warm front and cold front with it. And so on the graphic, in the radar screen, especially on the right there, where it all hooks in and there's a little ball right at the end, that's where a tornado would be. Now the good news is these guys produce most of the tornadoes out of all the thunderstorms, but 90% of these don't produce tornadoes. So only a small class of storms produce tornadoes, and only a very small class produce real violent tornadoes. Luckily in Vermont, I'll talk about the climatology, and I'll touch on this a little bit, we don't really get big violent tornadoes. Not to say that it never could happen, theoretically it could, but our mountains help us out a lot. It disrupts the wind flow enough that things can't really get organized long enough to spin up a tornado. Now certainly there are cases every year where weak tornadoes form. Here's an example of a supercell thunderstorm in the distance in the lower right. It could be, from a spotter's perspective, that could just be a strong single cell thunderstorm, so you really can't tell the difference from a farther away. But it's got an overshooting top on it. You can see that pretty clearly. So that's an indication that it's probably strong to severe. And then this is just another conceptualization of supercell thunderstorms, how the updraft in red is spinning. So what to look for in supercells: very large hail. They're the big hail producers. Extreme downdraft winds. They can occur with any thunderstorms, but these guys produce them more commonly. Tornadoes, theoretically strong, especially in the central U.S. Overshooting top as always. Here's the Plattsburgh supercell. Never produced a tornado, but a lot of wind damage. Again, you have to use a little bit of your imagination, but you can see here how it has a little hook on the end of it. And again, I told you earlier how we could see those downdrafts, those reds and greens, where you can see the rotation in the storm. You can see that. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute as well. 90 miles an hour at Treadwell Bay Marina. I know the marine operator up there. He's a good guy. Did a lot of damage. Blew boats off moorings and crazy stuff. So weak tornado strength, I'll go over this in a little bit, but there was never really a tornado on the ground. But it was spinning. Here's a supercell in eastern Montana. I'll play this a couple times. I call this the UFO mothership supercell. Again, you're never going to really see this in Vermont because you're not going to be able to, with all the trees and mountains, you can't see that far. And are you going to get one this big? These kind of big ones can produce the real violent tornadoes. Again, the light's kind of poor here, but as it goes up in slow motion, you're seeing this from a distance of about 20, 30 miles. And when it goes into fast motion, I was going to say, you'll see the whole thing spinning, and it'll go through it a couple times. And the tornado would be occurring kind of back on the lower, left part of the screen, kind of back toward that clearing line. So you can see the whole thing is just, the whole thunderstorm is spinning. So that's very dangerous, guys, when you see those. Okay, so let's talk about tornadoes here because we're in the supercell category here and they produce most of them. It's a violently rotating column of air in contact with the ground. Again, they are rare every 2 years in Burlington's area, 1 or 2 per year. We have better reporting now and we have better radar. So, is the climatology you mentioned increasing? Well, there's some evidence that there may be a few more tornadoes in the last 20 years than there were back before 1950, but nothing was reported before 1950. So you got to be careful with what, to say there's an increasing trend when you just don't have as good an information from back then. There's many tornado lookalikes. This is a cold air funnel in November over Lake Champlain. It is spinning a little bit, but it's very weak. And in these cold air funnels, I'm not going to go into them, but they never really reach the ground. They're caused by a different process. There's that. This right here is a hail shaft. So you have rain falling to the right, where it's all fuzzy, and right on the edge of the rain, there's a very kind of dense layer there. That's large hail falling out of the storm. But you could theoretically mistake that for a tornado. Tornadoes are rated on the Enhanced Fujita scale. You may have heard of the EF scale, EF0 to EF5. Most North Country tornadoes are EF0 to EF1. When we go out to do a tornado survey, just to explain it really quickly, we basically base it off the damage that occurred. We don't base it off the wind speed. We get the wind speed from the damage. So we'll go out and look at a damage path, and we'll say, okay, what is destroyed? Was it a mobile home? Was it a well-built family brick home? Was it a school? Was it an armory? Or was it like an industrial park building with metal? Those things can kind of cave in pretty quick. So then once you see what's destroyed, then you say, okay, how well was it built? So you could even theoretically have two seemingly well-built family homes, but maybe this home, the whole foundation wasn't strapped down to the foundation, or the roof wasn't, so it could have just been pushed off. So you get that down first, and then you can correlate the damage on the wind speed on what happened. Because it's hard, I know tornado, the winds are changing so rapidly, so quickly and varying, you've got to get kind of a damage picture first on basically what the gust speed is. Weak tornadoes, EF0 and EF1, they're 80% of all tornadoes. That's good. Good in the sense that they have less than 5% of all the tornado deaths. So we get the weak guys here. I've been here 11 years, nobody's died in a tornado. Not to say it can't happen, unfortunately, but they generally don't. 1 to 15 minute lifetimes, the path's up to 3 miles. Sometimes a little longer. Wind speed 65 to 109 miles an hour. Again, toward the end, I'll show you our severe weather criteria. Most North Country tornadoes. This is the Williamstown tornado. I've got it kind of highlighted, the storm there in the red oval going into eastern Vermont. And then there's some radar pictures. On the upper radar pictures, the two on the top, you see how it's got the hook on the bottom there? Very typical of a supercell thunderstorm. So the tornado is going to occur right in the hook where the circle is. And then on the bottom two radar pictures, I inferred how the radar can see the winds back on that downdraft scenario I showed you earlier in Williston. The radar in this example, this storm's down in Orange County. Our radar is off to the north and west in Chittenden County. Okay, so you're looking southeast. If you look at, for example, these radar images down on the bottom, let's take, for example, the lower right screen. The blue signatures and greens are all winds coming toward the radar, like I told you before, and the reds are going away. Okay, so if I'm looking southeast toward that screen, basically you have things coming away and going towards right next to one another in very strong winds. So if they're right next to one another and they're not spreading out like this, they're like this, you can imply it's rotating. Okay, so that's how you kind of detect tornadoes in a general sense. This is the North Cambridge tornado you mentioned about, sir. It was a 6 to 7 mile path length of damage, but the actual tornado damage was less than a mile long. It kind of skipped across here and there. If you go up a long route, I believe 108 Waterville area today, a couple of the ridge tops still look like somebody like clear cut the forest out of there. And it's really just the tornado damage. They've cleaned up all the trees and harvested that for the sake of profit since it was all destroyed, but it's all just like matchsticks all broken off up there. It was about 100 miles an hour damage to several homes and a farm. So there's a couple of pictures of it. There was stuff all thrown around. There's a mobile home in the distance over there. Debris. Strong tornadoes, EF2 and EF3, they're 19% of all tornadoes. So now the first EF0 and EF1 were 80%. So now we're talking, this is 90% of all tornadoes are EF3 and down. Less than 30% of tornado deaths. They're a little bit stronger, of course, and the path length is longer there, so their wind speeds are going to be a little bit higher. This was taken out in western Kansas. One of my buddies that works at the office used to work in western Kansas. He's a forecaster there and had some good chase opportunities. This one was about 3 miles from the office. Had several occasions where you could just see him right out the window, so he got a good shot of that. July 24th, 2008, New Hampshire tornado down in southeastern New Hampshire, Wolfboro. There was one fatality. This was an EF2 tornado with a 50-mile continuous track on the ground, but nobody saw it because it was in the rain. Again, I show you some of these idealized pictures of tornadoes. A lot of times they're in the rain, so you can't see it. So when you hear warnings, you got to, take those for real. It was on the ground for about 90 minutes. Hundreds of homes and structures were damaged and a lot of trees. You can see stuff very torn up in there. Here's some more pictures. Upper right, there's a home destroyed on a lake. Just a lot of stuff blown down. This is an EF tornado in Layton, Alabama, May 8, 2008. It was moving about 60 miles an hour, and it's a pretty small tornado, but it was an EF2, and it did some considerable damage. This will play several times. This is a security camera caught this going through a parking lot. So you'll watch those trucks and cars back there pretty quick, and it's gone. So if you were, you turn your head, it was like, what happened, So again, that's that EF2 scale, so you're talking over 100 miles an hour. And pickup trucks, by the way, are very easy to flip. The beds are light, and so wind gets up under that and just can flip them really fast. But there were some other cars flipped in there as well.
Then good to think of the EF5 on Sunday.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that would make this look like nothing. It would make that look. I've got an EF5 video I'll show you in a minute. Violent tornadoes, EF4 and EF5. They're only 1% of all tornadoes. They're 70% of all tornado deaths. Main reason is they're so strong that even if you're taking shelter in an interior room or a basement, you're not totally guaranteed to be safe because the whole structure will fail in different ways. Basically, in most structures, even well-reinforced or well-reinforced home, what happens initially is the roof gets compromised. And then once the roof gets compromised, the walls lose their structural integrity and it all caves in. And then depending on how strong the winds are, blown away. A real strong building usually can withstand even an EF5. You notice in Joplin, the hospital withstood that. All the windows were shredded and people were unfortunately sucked out of there and things like that, terrible things. But most well-built buildings will survive that. In the case of certain buildings and real strong tornadoes that fail, usually the walls just collapse. So if it's like an armory or something or a brick school, what'll happen, like Enterprise, Alabama, just the walls will just kind of fall in on one another. And necessarily, it's not necessarily completely blown away. It's just kind of, it all caves in because the roof is compromised. But you can have 1 hour or longer path lengths. I mentioned that tri-state tornado that was on the ground back in the 20s for 12 hours. 50 plus miles, and the wind speeds are way up there. They revised these scales about 5-6 years ago when they went to this EF scale, and it was a multi-collaborative effort between academia and the Weather Service and media to re-identify what these scales were. Texas Tech University is a pioneer in these wind damage experiments, and basically they found when you get winds over 200 miles an hour, most stuff is going to fail for the most part. Not to say 234 is an odd number, theoretically you get higher, but what happens is when you get right down on the ground, there's a lot of frictional effects that occur, and it's hard to measure and get winds all the way up to 300. It could be 500 feet up, it could be 300 miles an hour, but right down by the ground it's more closer to the low 200s, but that's plenty enough to compromise a building. Parkersburg, Iowa, May 25th, 08. Again, if this had happened back in the 50s, you had a lot more fatalities. People would have been out doing stuff and they wouldn't have had the warnings. So people were all in their basements. Unfortunately, there were still 8 fatalities and pretty much destroyed the town. Winds were well over 200. So I'm going to show you a video here, and this one's going to take probably the longest to show, but I can play it again. This one's always tough because when I click on it, there's a big delay. And I made the mistake the first couple times I played this. I kept clicking on it, and 18 versions suddenly appeared on my screen and bogged my little 2002 Dell computer all the way down. Okay, so let's play this. I think you've got this. This is a kid set his video camera up in a house and was viewing a house across the street. And everybody lived in this video, which is amazing. And he went down The Joplin one, which is really bad, is that it was a Sunday evening, so people were going to church service, and they also had high school graduation that night. So there were people already out for a reason. If it had happened later, or or even on other sorts of days, it probably may not have been as bad. But unfortunately, it was just a bad time. Okay, so that was the 4 types of severe thunderstorms. Okay, I hope you got a general understanding of what that was. Let's talk about lightning because it's very important. It's not severe by what we classify it as because we can't forecast lightning. It's an act of God, so to speak, random. Certainly, if you're struck, that's severe if it's struck. So I want to go over this a little bit about how lightning forms and the danger from it. Certainly, it's a deadly threat from any thunderstorm. Basically, it's an electric charge separates in the thunderstorm. When you have lightning in a storm, you have to have ice in the storm. You can't get lightning unless you have ice. And we already talked about hail, and any thunderstorm in the summer is pretty tall, above the freezing level, that 10,000 feet. And what happens is all those ice balls up in the storm, they're rubbing against one another, and if you ever took any high school physics, that creates static charge. Okay? So what you do is you get a positive charge generated in the top of the storm because of all that hail rubbing together. And just basically off of electromagnetism, you induce a negative charge at the bottom of the storm, which then correspondingly induces a positive charge on Earth. Now, Earth is generally weakly negative charged on any given day. It's weakly negative. But what happens is when the bottom of the cloud gets really negatively charged, it induces positive charge to flow, pulls it up toward the surface, towards high things, lightning rods. That's why they build lightning rods on buildings, to attract it so they can minimize the lightning threat to other areas. And then it finds the easiest path to the ground. So here's how it does. Charge separation, right? So you have positive charge toward the top. You have rain falling, negative charge, which is the yellow little balls on the lower side. And then on the ground, more red pluses, the positive charge induced below. Okay? That's how the process works to get it to go. So what happens is when the electric potential difference gets too great, the storm will send out a step leader down. So it's a big flow of negative ions coming down to meet the positive charge, negative electrons coming down to meet that positive charge, just like when you turn on an electric current in your house, the electricity flows. So the first thing happens is it sends down a feeler, and it's all branching out, trying to find the easiest path to connect that. Okay? And what happens, this is the speed of light, about 500 feet above the ground, right before it strikes, the ground positive charge sends an upward leader up to meet it. Okay? So this is occurring about 500 feet above the ground. So when somebody gets struck by lightning, you're actually getting struck from below through your feet because the positive charge is flying up through you to meet the bolt coming down. If you ever see people with hair standing on the end, that's that positive charge. You've heard of that about people on the tops of mountains that get off Mount Mansfield or out in the Rockies when it's lightning storms, and people's hair standing up. That's that positive charge coming up through. Okay. And so then what happens is once the connection is made, it'll send a dart leader down. That's your first flash of lightning. And then depending how much electric potential difference is still left, it could go up and down several times. And that's where you see the flickering several times. You've seen lightning like blink several times, or sometimes you just see one flash. And so that's what happens. So it sends the dart leader down, and then you get the upward return stroke right at the very end. And again, this is the speed of light. And then it hits that, and then it'll go down a couple times if it needs to release all that energy. Super slow-mo of lightning. This may be hard to see because we have light. You can see it coming down to the ground. You see it kind of right there, and then right when it gets about 500 feet above the ground, the first one that makes the connection, that's what'll set it off, and then all the rest of them will kind of fade out, and that'll be the main channel. It'll release the energy. So again, it's feeding down. It's trying to find its way all the way down. These pictures are amazing. They made them. These movies are like 40,000 frames a second or something. The guy, he's a professional. He takes all that, and then you can see the return stroke going. I'll let it run one more time. It'll pulse a couple times because it's the first dart leader, and then it's the separate strokes coming down to release the difference. And then once that's finally released, then the lightning's done. And then see, there it is again. Lightning facts, it can strike as far away as 10 miles away from the storm. You've heard of a bolt from the blue. I've seen those several times in my life. certainly can happen. It can be sun shining and be a thunderstorm off up by Colchester, and suddenly lightning hits right here. Comes flying out of the storm and then sideways and down. It can certainly happen. About 75 to 125 deaths a year. Most victims survive. About 90% of the people that are struck survive, which is the good news, but they do have usually lasting neurological or motor coordination problems that have to either go through physical therapy and things of that nature. Most people, if you're struck, you're going to have some kind of lasting issues after that, which is unfortunate. But the good news is most people live. So let's just review this section. We talked about thunderstorm development, classifications, right? The supercell, the line of thunderstorms, the multicell cluster of thunderstorms, and the single cell, the simplest version of that. And the visual aspects, the overshooting top, the shelf cloud, things of that nature, and then the types of weather they produce, the strong downburst or the straight line wind damage, hail, tornadoes, and lightning. Okay, let's talk about severe weather reporting and severe weather safety. We're kind of toward the tail end of the presentation here, but I think this is important because if you're going to be a spotter, or even if you're not a spotter and you want to call in severe weather with our number, these are the things we want to know. Certainly where, what, when, that kind of thing. Don't need to know the why. Where are you located? Certainly. Are you at your work, or are you at home? Where was the severe weather that you noticed? Was it in your yard, or was it driving home from work and you saw trees down on Old Colchester Road or something? What time was the severe weather to your best estimate? Don't call in when it's lightning and everything. We don't recommend that. Just wait till it's passed. So make an estimation of when it was. If you just saw it on the side of the road, you may not have known when it happened. Just say there's trees down coming home from work, and we'll try to go back and we can go back and look at the radar and kind of find when that when the storm crossed that area, and we can make an estimate. How long did it last if you actually observed it? And of course, who are you? Because we have a wealth of spotters, but we also have people that call in more regularly, and we know which ones definitely provide more regular reports. Those are people we trust more. Obviously, you build a trust with spotters, and so people that call in, those are people we tend to try to have a rapport with. Severe thunderstorm definition. This is what basically defines a severe thunderstorm. 1 inch or larger hail, which is quarter size or larger, so diameter of a quarter. Okay. Winds 50 knots or greater. That's an old aviation mariner's term. It equates to 58 miles an hour. More importantly, do you observe significant damage? Most people aren't going to be sticking an anemometer out there and reading it when the winds are howling. But if you see trees down or power lines down, things like that, that's important. So it's good to call in. So any kind of wind damage. Certainly if you can observe a funnel cloud or a tornado. A funnel cloud is just a tornado that's not hitting the ground. If you observe something rotating or tornado, certainly lightning is not severe, but it's not a killer. So you don't need to call in and say observe lightning, but if you want to call in and report wind damage and say I had really vivid lightning, or I saw lightning strike a house or a house fire or something like that. And I don't mention it here too. I think a little bit later I may touch on just briefly any kind of flooding. So if it's really heavy rain and your driveway's washed out or your creek's out of its banks, that's important stuff to mention. So there that is again. Hail. There's marbles there. I wouldn't reference hail size to marbles. That's very generic. A marble could be, varying size. A ball or a coin is the easiest way. So golf ball, ping pong ball, hopefully not baseball, or a coin, penny, dime, nickel, quarter. Or if you're really into it, you pick it up out of your yard after it's done and then you measure it. Give the diameter. This is our severe weather spotter number. I think it's on some of the free magnets here, fridge magnets as well. It's a free 800 number. Call any time of day. It's unlisted. Somebody will answer. It's not going to go to an automated voice machine. A human will pick that up. It may be a semi-awake human at 3 a.m., but somebody will answer it. But you can always contact local officials like local police or law enforcement or anybody and ask them to relay it. We have amateur radio. I'm a licensed ham, as is several other people in the office, and we run a call sign WX1 BTV at our office, and we monitor the white face repeater. If any of you like ham radio, we monitor that regularly. Or you can call us in on WX1 BTV and we'll answer. Usually there's somebody that's a ham on there that can answer. And certainly the internet. I showed you our internet page, and there's a button in that blue menu, Submit Storm Report. That'll just open up your webmail browser and you can type. It'll have a little form. What did you see? When did you see it? And basically when you send that, it goes to all of our emails and alarms. It goes to everybody just so that whoever's on the floor that evening gets it. And so that's how that works. So it's a pretty good system. And there's the hail again. Ball or coin, the best, not marbles. 1 3/4 inches of golf ball on the left. And then you can get up to a baseball, which is about as big as I've seen in Vermont. Estimating wind speed, anything below about 55 miles an hour, it's not going to really do too much damage. You certainly can have trees down in 40 or 50 mile an hour winds if the ground is very wet and the tree can get uprooted, or if it's on the side of a hill or something. But generally you have to get over about 55 miles an hour. Remember, severe is 50 knots or 58 is what we officially describe as severe. So once you get above 55, you start getting damage to chimneys and TV antennas, large limbs broken. Some trees are uprooted. And then as you get higher and higher, you start doing things like removing shingles, windows broken, trailer homes overturned or moved off their little foundations. And then 100 plus, 113 plus, you start getting roofs torn off. Now again, these high-end wind speeds over 70 to 100, you're talking hurricane, small tornado, or large tornado speeds. But those downdraft microburst winds that come out of the storm, they can be 100 plus too, the real strong ones. So it certainly can happen. There's wind speeds 55 to 72. A lot of the tree damage you'll see in the low-end severe criteria is softwoods. I think I mentioned that before. Spruces and pines, conifers, they end up getting snapped off really easy up top. So those are the first trees to go. Your hardwoods, like your oaks and your maples, they tend to withstand it a little bit better. There are exceptions. Another ones that are really bad are like the cottonwoods. There's some cottonwoods around town. There's a couple over by the high school. Those things can go really easily if you get strong winds. 73 to 112. This is when we start getting shingles and chimneys blown down, shingles torn off, windows blown out. And there was other damage on this storm, but you can see some shingles torn off this roof, and then on the lower right here, that window was blown out as well. So those are pretty strong gusts. 113 plus. The left picture is a little vacation home. It's in one of the little islands in Alexandria Bay, just offshore of St. Lawrence County. So it's like the northeast arm of Lake Ontario going up into the St. Lawrence River. And all those little kind of aquamarine little rectangles are parts of the roof that were blown off and thrown in the water. Another thing you'll see as well on really strong winds is big trees snapped off way down low. They won't be necessarily topped off. The whole tree will be snapped off. So that implies that the whole tree was bent over really far to snap it off down at the base. And so that tree right there is probably 18 inches in diameter easily. So an indication there was much stronger winds. Franklin County, Vermont, this was microburst wind damage. This was just a downburst wind coming out of the storm. Luckily, nobody was hurt here. There was a lot of siding torn off a home. That barn there was imploded straight in. It was pretty much a total loss. They had to replace the roof, and there was on the back side, there was also some of the walls failed. So basically, it just came straight down and just imploded it. But there was nobody at these residents. There was a couple residents, very small area that got affected. But 100 mile an hour plus. So let's talk a little bit about flash flooding. This is the #1 threat in the North Country. I can show you the real cool tornado videos and everything, but flash flooding is by far up here the biggest threat. Road washouts, people driving up into high water, it happens all the time. Last year there were 2 water rescues, one in Vermont and one in New York. One guy drove off a ditch up in Orleans County near Barton and had to swim for it. And then some campers up in Ellenburg Depot got caught by high water and had to be had water rescues. Luckily, they survived. Very important stuff. This is flash flooding in Barre, Vermont, back in '07. One phenomenon you get in flash flooding a lot is something called training thunderstorms. So basically, what happens is the thunderstorms basically move over the same area over and over again. So one will pass, then another one will pass, and then another one will pass. And that's what happened back in late April here, where we got the 3 inches and we had some flooding around the area. It was training. So in this radar example in eastern Vermont, I see 1, 2, 3, at least 4 thunderstorms just east of the Green Mountains there, and they were all riding south to north. So they were all traversing the same area. So radar I mentioned can estimate precipitation. This is northwest Windsor County down by Stockbridge and Gaysville, down there where the reds are, and that's about 5 to 6 inches of rain. Generally, a rule of thumb is anything over 3 inches within 6 hours or so in the Green Mountains, that'll give you, our Adirondacks, that'll give you flooding. It doesn't matter if we've been dry for 2 weeks or it's been wet. 3 inches, or less if it's really wet. It could not rain for 3 weeks here, and if you get 3 inches in an hour, you're going to flood. It just comes out of the hills. And then this is a 1 hour precipitation estimate from that event. And it's hard to see, but the blue and red right in the middle there, that's about 3 to 4 inches in 1 hour. So you're going to have some serious flooding with that. And so that's just outside of Barry, Vermont, along Route 302 or 301, a neighborhood. Creek came out of its banks and did a lot of severe damage. A lot of stuff was damaged. There was a restaurant in this area too that was a total loss. Had a lot of high water, just so very dangerous stuff. So here's a radar picture of a flash flood, and if you look at that, it's going to repeat. Where do you think the flash flood was in this picture? Anybody want to take a guess? This is over about a 3 hour frame. If you look at that again, anybody take a guess? It's kind of hard to see. Right there. It's Bristol, Vermont, about 5 to 6 inches of rain in 3 hours. Watch that one more time. Watch how that thunderstorm just sits there, doesn't move. Everything else is, all the other storms are moving. See how that one's just sitting there and it's not moving? And the radar will give you precipitation estimates, and so we were able to put a warning out on that. So in hydrology, our big little slogan is turn around, don't drown, because most flash flooding deaths are in cars. It's people driving through high water. That's North Williston Road, right? It floods like 2 times a year, always when the Winooski gets kind of high. Now this isn't flash flooding, this is river flooding. It's a little different, but the point is you just don't want to drive through high water. And they've done a lot of statistics. Most of the demographics are pretty striking. The majority of the deaths are like males between 18 and 32 and driving pickup trucks. That's like the highest bar on the graph. So it's Bubba out there thinking he can just power right on through it, you know. But if you can't see the road, you don't know where the shoulder is, and it could be washed out, which often happens. We also do flooding for the rivers, as I mentioned, and also for ice jamming in the winter. I'm not touching too much on that, but river flooding with ice jams is always important. So we have a hydrology page, a rivers and lakes link on our webpage. You can click on that. You can go to different river gauges, including the Winooski gauge right here in Essex Junction. North Williston Road goes under. We're redefining the flood stage, and that gets to 12 feet. North Williston Road goes under. So if you take North Williston Road to work, that'll be a good gauge. And so when you click on the gauge, it'll show you a plot. So it'll show you what's happened, and then the green bar is what our forecast is. And it's got categories: action stage, which is kind of like bank full, and then minor flood, moderate flood, and major flood. And below this graph, I don't show it, but it'll show you what it means. So in major flood, what are the impacts that we've learned through the years that happens? And so it's pretty nice. If your property is affected by river flooding or anything like that, or it's important to you, you can click on these gauges and see that. So finally, the last bit, a little bit about safety, because it's the #1 priority for anybody, including spotters. Do not put yourself in danger to go try to find the storm and go out there and film it, because it's amazing how many people, spotters, even in the Midwest, don't know what they're doing, and they get too close to the storm, and it gets out of control and people get hurt. So severe weather safety, basically either move to the basement or the interior part of a room. Now, I don't recommend doing this unless it's a tornado warning for your area. If it's a severe thunderstorm warning, just going to an interior room is fine. Generally stay off electrical appliances, stay away from windows, that kind of thing when it's under severe thunderstorm warning. If it's a tornado warning, certainly try to get to a middle room and take shelter, definitely like this. And these, in the Midwest, they take it very seriously, so you would definitely want to go in. But any kind of tornado warning, which is rare, I would recommend getting in a closet just to stay safe. Stay away from windows, protect yourself from flying debris. If you're a worker at school, pretty easy. The only thing I would ask here is find out if there's a severe weather plan. So if you're at work, and if I hear the severe weather alerts go off, where do I go at work? It's usually like a break room or your bathroom or something at work, where if you suddenly hear stuff flying or something, where to run to immediately, just know where that is. And certainly know where the shelters are, and avoid exterior walls and windows. Also avoid large rooms. So if there are severe weather warnings out for the area, warnings now, not watches. Stay away from like big box stores like Walmart and Lowe's and all that kind of places. They have those big, wide, expansive roofs that can implode really easy. Gymnasiums are not good places to be. There's been a history of fatalities through the years of people in gyms where the gym fails but the rest of the school doesn't. So just big, large rooms are not the best place to be. If you're outdoors, just pay attention to the weather. I mentioned on mobile devices, there's a lot of cheap apps you can get for just a small amount that'll alert you if most of your activities in Chittenden County, and you're outdoors a lot, or if you like a boat like I do and get out on Champlain, you got a pager and immediately know if there's storms in the area. So seek shelter immediately if a warning's issued, or if you perceive a threat. If you hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck. So you see lightning or you hear thunder, definitely get inside. Stay away from any kind of high things, because I remember I showed you in those lightning videos where this positive charge is flowing up to meet the leader stroke. Any kind of pointy things like tall trees or a boat mast or a flagpole, or you're standing out there with a golf club, those are bad things to be. You're just putting yourself at a much greater risk of getting struck. So those kind of things stay away from. And the last, I mentioned New Cross recommendations. They're controversial. It's kind of a strongly worded. They're not endorsed by us. Basically, it's not really too applicable here. More or less, there was some confusion out there. If you see a tornado, if you're in your car, are you best to try to outrun it with your car? Are you best to stop and get in line in a ditch? And basically, they did a lot of research, and they found that it doesn't really matter. It's random. There are many cases where people got a good judge of where the tornado was going and went like at a right 90-degree angle and were able to get away. And other people that tried to do that, and the tornado, they couldn't figure out where they were going. The tornado caught them and threw the car, and they were killed. There were other people that decided to lie in a ditch and were great. They lied in a ditch, and the tornado went overhead, and they weren't touched. There were other people, Oklahoma City 99, the big EF5 that destroyed part of Oklahoma City, they got out of the cars and ran up under the underpasses of the interstate, and the tornado basically just sandblasted them and killed them up in there. So they're mixed signals, and that's all that is that it's kind of basically use your best judgment. You hopefully will never see a tornado in Vermont since they're very uncommon. Those are more applicable out there in Kansas and Nebraska and Texas, where you see them more and are likely to see them. Flood safety, of course, do not walk or drive across high water. Certainly evacuate home or businesses if along a creek or river. Be especially cautious at night. Obey all road closure signs. Don't try to go around them. There could be a road washed out up there and you just drive off into a ditch. It happens, believe me, all the time. And it's amazed me in my 11 years here how many of those times we've heard that happen and nobody's died. It's really luck, more or less. And move to high ground. If it's a last-ditch effort and water's just coming out of the hills, which sometimes it does, run to high ground. If you're out in the Rocky Mountain states, there's signs everywhere. If you've been out west, just move to higher ground immediately, because a lot of those roads in the Rockies are going up canyon roads, and there's no other way to go but to stop your car and run up the hills. So on a last-ditch effort, move to higher ground. This is Hancock 08. Very, very dangerous stuff. Luckily, not a lot of, luckily no fatalities. Did a lot of damage though. Again, we've talked about lightning safety. I'm not going to go through this much anymore. Just stay away from open, tall things. So in summary, we really rely on our Skywarn spotter network. They're the eyes on the ground. They're a very important part of the severe weather process. We really encourage people to report severe weather. We talked about all the thunderstorm types, and I showed you some little animated GIF files and some movies, hopefully to spice it up a little bit, and talked about the hail, wind, and tornadoes that they produce. I will touch on one little final thing here. Coco Ross. This is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. If you're really into measuring the weather, there's a volunteer free network you can join where you measure precipitation every day, and you submit it online. And we process those reports and put them on our webpage. And we also use it to gauge how much precipitation has fallen from a hydrological perspective. So it's not explicitly weather service, but we work with this organization. It's free. It's called cocoross.org. I believe I've got some pamphlets over here. You go on a website, you get a little rain gauge. You measure rain every day at like 7 a.m. and you submit the report. It takes a few minutes. If there's no rain, you don't report anything. And so some people that really like to get into the weather and measure that like to get into that network. And that's kind of just some screen captures of the web page and where you would go. So that is all I got. I've got business cards if you need my number or anything. Again, that's our 1-800 unlisted spotter number, which is again on our magnets. And you can always click on a spotter report on the web if you want to submit severe weather that way. We always appreciate it. We may not email you back because we're busy, but be assured that people will see that and we'll really appreciate that. So thanks a lot for coming out on a bad night and listening to me. And